Kansas City, Missouri, 1929. In an era of massive change, women newly armed with the vote began to test traditional gender norms. And one way they could do that was surprising. It was by playing the card game that was a national craze, contract bridge. But when a husband and wife played their neighbors one night, one bad hand turned deadly. And the reaction throughout the country was unexpected. It's the history of murder, and I'm your host, Clare O'Donoghue. The 1920s in America was a time of transformation, socially, economically, and politically. For the first time in the nation's history, more Americans lived in cities than on farms. And in those cities, issues like immigration, race, sexual morality, and alcohol all became flashpoints. Ralph Monaco, author of Last Hand at Park Manor, said that no sins, even prohibition, the nationwide ban on alcohol, were strongly enforced in the cities, especially Kansas City.
Kansas City was called then, and it has kept some of that name, the Paris of the Plains. Edmund Murrow once said, if you want to find sin, forget Paris, go to Kansas City.
Before we continue, please remember to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. It will help us continue to make new content. Now, back to the story.
It was in Kansas City that a striking couple, Jack and Myrtle Bennett, found success. John Bennett, nicknamed Jack, was handsome and charming. He came from a big family farm in Illinois, but longed for the bright lights of city life. During World War I, he joined the military and served in a medical division as a pharmacist. Myrtle, a dark-haired beauty, was from a small town in Arkansas. Her father died when she was a toddler, leaving Myrtle and her mother destitute. So to make ends meet, Myrtle quit school at the age of 15 and went to work, first as a telephone operator, then as a stenographer.
She worked as a maid. She worked for a judge as the house servant, and she took care of her mom. And her mom and her were really close. She wanted to make sure that her mom stayed with her.
In 1917, she went with a friend to St. Louis, and in a private home saw a photo of an attractive young soldier. She learned his name was Jack Bennett. It said, Myrtle promised herself that she would meet and marry that man someday. And a year later, she did. On a train heading to Chicago, 23-year-old Myrtle saw the good-looking man from the photo. She introduced herself, and 25-year-old Jack was instantly smitten. After only 3 dates, they got engaged. They married on November 18, 1918, a week after Armistice Day, the end of World War I.
He came out of the war with not much in his pocket, so they both worked and struggled together. He ended up landing some good jobs. Myrtle helped him work his way up. He became successful.
Friends said they were extremely affectionate, always holding hands and embracing in public. But in private, well, that was another story. Myrtle was known to have flashes of anger that could erupt suddenly. Jack had the exact same problem, but his outbursts could sometimes turn violent. Guy Baker, who had hung wallpaper in the couple's apartment, would later testify about Jack's temper.
Once in the apartment, I saw Mr. Bennett slap his wife real hard.
He was the man of the house. She was subordinate. I think she was an abused spouse. I do believe that if a man lays a hand on a woman, they're not just a cad, they're evil. You don't hit somebody unless you're trying to defend yourself. And there had been plenty of stories that him slapping her was not just a one-off event.
The Bennetts also had another problem, which caused issues in their marriage.
She had a couple of miscarriages, or one, I believe, was a stillbirth. She struggled with that mightily. The depression that she experienced over those deaths, I think, helped create somewhat of a melancholy state.
That melancholy only increased in 1925 when Myrtle made a shocking discovery. The couple had just moved to Kansas City, and Jack was flourishing as a traveling salesman for a perfume company. But one day, in the pocket of his trousers, Myrtle found letters from another woman professing her love for Jack. Suddenly their marriage, and Myrtle's place as the wife of a successful salesman, felt very fragile.
Bennett had become a very successful salesman, and he was making $10,000 to $15,000 a year.
That would have been the equivalent of about $270,000 today. Jack Bennett was, as folks said in the 1920s, flush with clams. In 1927, he bought a place in the Park Manor building, located in a high-class neighborhood. The Bennetts hosted fancy parties, joined the country club, and sped around town in their shiny cabriolet convertible. Also enjoying their lavish lifestyle was Myrtle's mother, Alice. She lived with them in their spacious 6-room apartment. Luckily, Jack didn't mind.
He encouraged her to live with him.
Jack also encouraged Alice to keep his automatic pistol in her room, as their elegant building sometimes attracted thieves and prowlers.
He kept it in her linen closet, his mother-in-law's, because when he would often travel selling perfume and other items to women that he would sell as a traveling salesman, he would take Myrtle with him. And so she, living in that apartment, made sure she had a gun in case something were to happen.
Myrtle, with time and money on her hands, took up a passion that was becoming an obsession across the nation: the card game, bridge.
Everybody who was anybody played bridge. Babe Ruth played bridge. Lou Gehrig played bridge. Groucho Marx, Red Skelton. You name a great actor, actress, they played bridge. That was the go-to game.
Bridge is a partnership game with 4 players, where the goal is to win tricks, a set of 4 cards. The full deck is dealt evenly among the players, and 2 players play against the other 2. The game has 2 main phases. First is the bidding, where partners determine a contract. That is how many tricks they pledge to win. Then comes the actual play itself. Elites around the world had loved bridge since the late 1800s.
Notice closely, you bridge fiends. These girls were not as dumb as they looked. Long dresses and 4 or 5 petticoats softened many a kick on the shins. They had a lot on their minds, though. Look at those hats. Somebody's on the pan for a grand slam. Bridge hasn't changed a bit.
But it was in the 1920s when it really exploded, and that was due to millionaire Harold Vanderbilt. He was an avid player, and during a long cruise decided to set up the stakes by adding a new scoring system. Players would get bonus points for fulfilling their contracts and be penalized when they didn't. This added an element of risk and required more strategic planning during the bidding. This new game, called Contract Bridge, began sweeping the country. Myrtle Bennett loved it and worked hard to become a good player. She studied books on the subject, played with friends several times a week, and read about it in a newspaper.
When I was a kid growing up, you can get in the Kansas City Star, and it would have cards laid out and a bridge hand. It would tell you which one to play, give you bridge advice. So that's how big the game was.
Everyone knew that Myrtle took bridge very seriously. She would sit on the edge of her chair, passionately focused on the game. Jack, however, played bridge like he conducted business, with a lot of brashness and swagger. 2 of their regular partners were their upstairs neighbors, Charles and Mamie Hoffman.
The Hoffmans and the Bennetts were all good friends. They had both lived in the same Park Manor for about 5 years, and they socialized together. They played bridge together. Bennett and Charles Hoffman had a membership to Indian Springs Golf Club, which was nearby Plaza. So just to have a membership there, you had to have money.
On the morning of September 29, 1929, a Sunday, Jack and Charles went golfing at Indian Springs. They came back to Park Manor for supper. After eating, both Myrtle and Mamie wanted to play around themselves. Women were only allowed to play late in the day at the club.
So the foursome, they go back to the golf course. And they get in, I don't know, one account says they got in 11 holes. They then go back to Park Manor, and by now it's kind of dark. They drank during their lunch. They drank when they were golfing in Indian Springs at a bar there, even though Prohibition was in effect, right? Who cares? They go back, and they're having a couple more cocktails, and Bennett knew he had to be in St. Joe the next morning. St. Joe today from Kansas City is about a 50-minute travel, right? Back then, it's probably 3 hours, if not longer, depends on the road condition.
Since he had a road trip planned for the next day, the four decided against going out for the evening. Instead, they stayed at the Bennett's apartment and played cards. Sometime after 9:30 p.m., the game started. At first, the Bennetts were winning, but then the cards turned and the Hoffmans pulled ahead, and Myrtle and Jack began sniping at each other.
And they kept drinking.
As the game became more intense, Jack played his hand, needing 10 tricks. He came up too short. Myrtle unloaded on him.
You're a bum bridge player.
Suddenly, Jack exploded.
What we do know is that he stood up, flipped over the card table, the cards went flying, and he slapped her 4 or 5 times.
Myrtle burst into tears, and Mamie Hoffman tried to comfort her. Jack, still furious, said he would leave and spend the night at a motel. Myrtle would later say she tried to comfort her husband.
I just thought it would be better to try and make him feel better, to ask him not to go and to apologize to our guests. He told me to go get his gun.
Jack said he wanted to take the gun with him on his trip, so Myrtle got it from her mother's room. And here's where the story gets, well, murky. Myrtle would tell one version of the story later on the witness stand.
I stumbled over a large chair. I don't know how it happened. Something struck my arm. The gun discharged. I was scared to death.
What we do know unequivocally is that 4 shots rang out. 2 missed. 1 hit the door, the other one hit the hand, like above the door.
That first shot didn't hit anyone, but it must have scared more than Myrtle. She said that Jack came toward her.
He was running toward me. When he got to me, he grabbed hold of me. He caught my arm and twisted it somehow. In the shuffle, the gun discharged. I don't know how it happened, but that's what happened.
And as he was dying, Myrtle was standing, really kneeling next to him, holding his hand.
Jack Bennett, 36 years old, died on the floor of his luxury apartment. The police were called, and Myrtle was taken into custody. She ended up sharing a cell with another woman, Evelyn Helms, who a few months earlier had shot her husband after years of abuse. From the moment that cell door shut, Myrtle was hysterical, continuously shrieking in terror.
They gave her a tranquilizer, sedative, and then they took her statement. And the statement was somewhat damaging.
What she said that night to patrolwoman Trowbridge was very different.
I went into the den and he was packing. He said he was going to leave me. I shot him.
That seemed pretty straightforward. And he had just slapped her in front of the Hoffmans, humiliating her. Had Myrtle simply lashed out in anger and was now admitting it? Possibly. Then again, she had been given a sedative before she made the statement. Did she even know what she was saying? However the shooting happened, the result was the same. Jack, fatally wounded, collapsed inside the apartment. According to their friends, Charles and Mamie Hoffman, Myrtle was horrified and began wildly sobbing and wailing. Charles Hoffman would tell police that Jack did slap Myrtle and that he, Charles, had tried to play peacemaker, but Jack was in no mood. He asked the Hoffmans to leave.
There is no question that Mrs. Hoffman didn't see it. When this whole thing happened, she was so upset that she left.
But Charles Hoffman stayed. He would later say he saw Myrtle coming towards Jack with the gun. Though the pistol was pointed toward the ground, Charles was concerned.
My God, Myrtle, what are you going to do?
In Charles's original statement, Myrtle was not struggling with Jack when the gun went off.
He testified in the preliminary hearing. She shot him from a distance in the back.
Prosecutor James Page felt confident he could get a conviction. His case was that Jack was standing near the bathroom, packing his things for the trip when Myrtle, not close enough to be in danger, shot him several times. It was not self-defense. It was not an accident. It was murder. Jack's past as an abusive husband was of little concern to Page, especially after he found success in the case of Myrtle's cellmate.
Evelyn Helms gets convicted. Jim Page, the prosecutor, was able to get a conviction. After Evelyn Helms gets convicted, Myrtle Bennett has a complete breakdown, and then they have to take her out to the sanitarium for the mentally unstable for a while to recover. There's probably another reason why it took a year and a half almost for the case to go to trial.
Myrtle's case finally did go to trial on February 23, 1931. A huge crowd assembled outside the Jackson County Courthouse. By then, with the bridge craze at its height, the killing had become a national obsession, and the media feasted on the story. Across the country, people tuned to their radios to hear the details of the case, especially what hand Jack had been playing that apparently led to murder. When Myrtle did step into the courtroom, the country was buzzing. She had an advantage her cellmate Evelyn Helms didn't. Myrtle was a woman of means. Aside from the couple's money, she stood to inherit $30,000 from Jack's insurance, almost $620,000 today. So she was able to retain top-notch defense lawyers. J. Francis O'Sullivan was one of those attorneys, and leading the team would be former Kansas City mayor and former U.S. Senator James A. Reed.
He had been the U.S. attorney. After World War I ended, Wilson wanted to get the United States in the League of Nations. Do you know who single-handedly prevented the U.S. from becoming a member of the League of Nations?
That was James A. Reed. Even though he had a defendant who had admitted to the crime and an eyewitness to the shooting, Reed devised a plan to overcome those setbacks. In other words, he played the hand he was dealt, and he played it very well. From the start, Reed worked to make Myrtle as sympathetic as possible. He encouraged her to wear black every day and go without makeup. And whenever she wasn't crying in the courtroom, which was often, Reed would get teary-eyed himself. It was Reed's intention to play to the hearts of the 12 men in the jury box, while Prosecutor Page's mission was to appeal to their heads.
Page had a diagram of how she stalked him around the house, the gun in the hand, and ultimately he died in the tree.
Previous to the trial, Charles Hoffman had told prosecutors that Jack was next to the dresser, packing his clothes in the bedroom. That would have given Myrtle a full view of him when she came into the bedroom. But on the stand, he changed his mind.
The last time I saw Mr. Bennett, he was standing right alongside the bed.
He changed his trial testimony that he couldn't see anything because they were against the bed when the shots fired.
He added that his back was turned. Charles now said he didn't see the shooting, which would allow for Myrtle's version to go unchallenged. Page was shocked. This was a complete change from his earlier statements.
I think Hoffman was really angry at John Bennett for slapping his wife, because he told Bennett, "You better apologize to her. What you did was wrong. You better apologize. And it better be more than his roses the next day, you know? I mean, you better have a genuine change of disposition and attitude in perpetuity, right?" And I think Hoffman was angry about that.
Without his star prosecution witness, Page changed tactics. Using Jack's bloody shirt, Page had the deputy coroner testify about the bullet holes. He said either one of the two shots that hit Jack would have killed him. But there was a dispute about the stains on it.
Judge Latshaw had ballistic testing done on that white shirt to see if those were bullet burns or powder burns. If they're powder burns, it's a close range.
When the testing was done, it was determined that the stains were actually residue left by the bullets, so they could not be used to determine where Myrtle was standing when the pistol was shot.
The bullet entries that are in the up in the wall, door, are high up. They are not on the ground. They are not like at waist level. He was shot in the upward back and side and the back. Those shots were fired up.
Defense attorney Reed claimed the upward angle of the shots was due to the struggle between Jack and Myrtle for the gun. He and O'Sullivan even acted out that scene for the jury. But others disagreed.
From my perspective, the bullet wounds in the upper part, or the bullet entries into the upper ceiling, would show somebody shooting at a long distance.
Regardless, Myrtle, Reed claimed, never intended to shoot her husband. She was a loving and devoted wife and a woman of integrity.
He brought people in from really almost all of the Midwest with whom she worked. What a great character she was, what a wonderful woman she was. And of course, Jim Page brought on these great people that testified how wonderful John Bennett was. He took care of his wife, gave her all the money she needed.
Prosecutor Page also called several neighbors of the Bennetts who claimed to have heard the shots being fired. One eyewitness said she heard 2 shots and then a bit later 2 more from a much further distance than the first 2, thus backing up Page's contention of a chase in the apartment. He also made sure the jury heard Patrolman Trowbridge's account about Myrtle's damning confession in the jail. But James Reed reminded the court that Myrtle was so upset the night of the shooting that she had been tranquilized. The prosecution then called Annie Jane Rice, Jack's half-sister. She testified that she had visited Myrtle at the Bennett apartment 6 weeks after the killing. She had asked Myrtle why she shot Jack. Allegedly, Myrtle told her that, quote, "nobody but me and my God know why I did it," unquote. Annie testified that when the trial was over, Myrtle promised to tell her, assuring her that, quote, "then you won't feel so bitter about it," unquote. Did Myrtle mean that the shooting was the ultimate result of Jack abusing her? Or did she have another motive? The trial was up for grabs on her motive, but the public was focused on something else: the game. Reconstructions of the alleged fatal final hand appeared everywhere. Bridge experts explained how they would have handled the game in Jack's place, and bridge players debated whether Jack or Myrtle had been the one who truly botched the game. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. On Wednesday, March 4th, 1931, at 9:40 a.m., Myrtle Bennett took the stand. Trembling, teary-eyed, and emotional, she testified that Jack had hit her often during their marriage, and that night she was in fear of her life. She knew nothing about guns, she said, and maintained that the shooting was an accident.
I was frightened to death when he came toward me. I didn't know what he was going to do. I was just frightened to death when he took hold of me, and that's all I know.
Then Reed asked the key question.
Now, Mrs. Bennett, did you intentionally or consciously fire that gun at your husband that night?
No, indeed I did not. I'd rather have been dead myself.
Myrtle held her own when Page cross-examined her. She kept repeating that she couldn't remember the exact details of that night. It was all so fuzzy. So Page only questioned her for about 40 minutes. But he still had one critical card left to play. Prosecutor Page had a bombshell witness lined up: Bird Rice. He was Jack's nephew and had lived with the couple for a while. Rice took the stand, and Page asked him if he'd spoken to Myrtle after the killing. Immediately, Reed objected. The judge asked the jury to leave the court, and he alone listened to Rice's story. Rice said that he'd visited Myrtle at the apartment after the shooting.
He said that Myrtle walked him around the entire apartment complex, showed him exactly what transpired, and admitted that she shot him at a long range.
If that was true, then Myrtle's fuzziness on the details of that night during her cross-examination was false. Paige claimed she did, in fact, remember exactly what happened. But Reed protested that it was unjust to bring in this last-minute witness when prosecutors had known about him months earlier. However, only one person from the prosecutor's office had actually known about Rice, the assistant prosecutor.
That story was then communicated to the assistant prosecutor who was investigating the case. So Paige didn't know anything about this. Judge Latshaw says, "You should have told Mr. Reed and Mr. O'Sullivan in advance that he was a potential witness."
Apparently, the assistant prosecutor had left his job before the trial, and he hadn't told anyone about the Rice interview. The judge ruled for the defense. Bird Rice was not allowed to testify. The prosecution's bombshell never exploded in court. But he did tell his story. He just told it to the newspapers, and through them, to the entire country.
Only people that didn't hear it were the 12 men who were on the jury. By the way, many of them started playing bridge during the 9 days of the trial.
During closing arguments, Reed delivered an emotional plea for his client.
Impose any penalty whatever upon her, place the brand of unlawful killing of her husband upon her, and you destroy her. Or you can say to this woman, you are simply the victim of misfortune that took your husband and your support and left you a widow to take care of yourself in this world. That is misfortune enough. All I can say, gentlemen, is read the instructions and find, if you can, where there was intent to kill in this case. Find the evidence to sustain it.
You will not find it. It isn't there.
Reed cried. Reed put on a theatrical performance that King Lear couldn't have performed, as well. She should just give her the maximum, because 1 day in prison is the maximum to her. That's what he argued.
In his closing, Prosecutor Paige asked if it truly had been an accident. Why didn't Myrtle say that right away?
Did she say it was an accident? No. This is what she said to Mrs. Trowbridge. I shot him. He slapped me. This man was making $18,000 a year and was a bum bridge player. He was a bum bridge player because he had to work and couldn't learn to play bridge.
According to Paige, Myrtle and her lawyer's behavior in the courtroom was, quote, seeking to overcome the facts by tears, unquote. Now it was in the hands of the jury. The first night, they deliberated for more than 3 hours. The next day, they took 8. But by that afternoon, they had a verdict. Not guilty. Myrtle collapsed into Attorney O'Sullivan's arms and whispered to the jury,
I thank you, gentlemen.
The jury foreman reportedly said, quote, it was not that the defense proved her innocent of murder. It was that the state did not prove her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, unquote. But an assistant prosecutor in Paige's office later remarked,
It looks like an open season against husbands.
Evelyn Helms, Myrtle's cellmate, would serve 3 years of a 10-year sentence before being paroled. Myrtle's not guilty verdict meant she would receive the $30,000 from Jack's life insurance, plus more than $15,000 from his estate, a total of nearly $1 million now.
She disappeared from society. She knew she had to go as far away from Kansas City as she could, and she did. She ends up at the Carlisle Hotel in New York as a head maid for 30 years.
After working as head of housekeeping at the Carlisle, Myrtle retired to Florida. Apparently, she continued to play bridge. Writer and radio personality Alexander Woollcott, known for his biting wit, told a well-publicized story about Myrtle in her later years. Wolcott said Myrtle was known to have difficulty finding bridge players, but found one who didn't know about her past. After making a poor bid, the young man said to her, "Partner, I'm afraid you'll want to shoot me for this." Mrs. Bennett, Wolcott quipped, had the good taste to faint. On January 21, 1992, Myrtle Bennett died in North Miami Beach, Florida, at the age of 96. Upon her death, her estate was valued at just over $1 million. She bequeathed her own family less than 0.5% and an additional over 20% to close friends. The rest, 80% of her estate, went to Jack's family members.
Myrtle had played her last hand. She left well over $600,000 to Mary Jacobs and Helen Fugina, nieces of John Bennett. For the first time since she had killed him, she made her own act of contrition.
What do you think about this case? Please comment below. And if you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like and notification buttons, and let us know if there are cases you'd like us to cover.